Summer is here and the heat is setting us all ablaze. Sweltering temperatures across the world make us all want to run away to an island paradise for refuge, some nice tropical breeze, and dips in the ocean water. When Desis decide to run away from this heat, the closest option that comes to mind is Thailand. Tropical rainforests nestled on landmasses in the Indian Ocean with vibrant nightlife and breathtaking scenery, Thailand is a paradise dream come true. That is what Hannah Witheridge, David Miller, and countless other young people thought when they arrived on the Thai island called Koh Tao. This is the story of those countless young people. This is the story of the Death Island. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today is equal parts terrifying and mysterious.
When we say craziest cases from around South Asia,
Yep.
this time we're talking about the craziest case from Southeast Asia.
Just a
Just
little
venturing
bit
a little
further
further away.
Yeah.
And what's the reason behind us covering this, Aishwarya?
I think it's such a vibrant area in the subcontinent, not just for obviously people from all over the world. They travel to, Southeast
Yeah.
Asia for their vacation spots, but also for us Desis. It's a hub for us as the Indian diaspora, the Pakistani diaspora, we're all there for our vacation
And
spots.
much like you were there just
Yes,
a few days
so
ago.
I had the opportunity to be able to go to Thailand and be able to, interview some locals for this case, take in the topography for myself while I wrote the script.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience.
So, Aishwarya, before you take us to what you call the Death Island,
Correct.
if you guys want to fund more such trips for Aishwarya to go to Thailand and other South Asian countries,
Totally.
we need money for that. And money comes when you hit the subscribe button down there. So we urge you to hit that red button so that we can travel to fun places and cover crimes from not just Asia, but wherever. Maybe a murder in Greenland. But that
Absolutely.
requires like 1 million subscribers.
Go subscribe. This case that we have for you today is a little bit different than the others. This story is not so much about any one victim, but about a whole island where many people have become victims. And so we'll tell you the tale of this island through multiple different people's lives and, unfortunately, the stories of their deaths. Before we start the case for today, I want to thank the work done by iHeartMedia, Connor Powell, and Tom Stone for their work documenting the many murders on Koh Tao. Their first-hand investigations formed an invaluable source for us. Chapter 1. Paradise Shattered. The story of Hannah Witheridge and David Miller. On the 25th of August 2014, two groups of young British travellers were arriving in the Thai island of Koh Tao separately. 23-year-old Hannah Witheridge was a part of one group travelling with her two best friends after having recently graduated from the University of East Anglia. Hannah had started her postgraduate studies in speech and language therapy at the University of Essex when she decided to use her time off from college to come to Thailand. 24-year-old David Miller was part of the other group, also having arrived in Koh Tao the same day as Hannah with his three best friends after just graduating from the University of Leeds in civil engineering. To take a break before he began the application process for his postgraduate studies, David picked Koh Tao as his travel spot. To both these youngsters and their friends, this was a much-deserved vacation after years of grueling studies in what is arguably one of the most beautiful tropical destinations in the world, while also being one of the most affordable. Every young student's dream. Have you ever been to Koh Tao?
Yes, I go for like 2-day traveling with my mom there.
And what do you know about it? What is it famous for?
Actually, for the beach, it's very nice. It feels like you be in Maldives or something. Actually, in April, I recommend for you when you go there. In April, it's very nice because it's like in the summer. It's a little bit hot there, but believe me, the beach is very nice in that day.
And are there a lot of tourists there?
Yeah.
And
Just
it's
in the high season.
okay. And of all major Thai islands, Koh Tao was a very popular one back in 2014. Even though it spans only 21 square kilometers and is the smallest of the major Thai islands, Koh Tao was a scuba diving and marine adventure hub a decade ago, with more than 100 hotels and resorts, and was even labeled the busiest diving center in Southeast Asia in 2014. Located 250 miles from the country's capital, Bangkok, more than 500,000 tourists would visit the island back in the day every year. So it was no surprise that to young travelers like Hannah and David, Koh Tao was absolutely perfect. These two groups of British friends didn't know each other, despite having studied only 4 hours apart in the UK, but they were destined to cross paths thousands of miles away from home in Koh Tao. Turns out, Hannah and David were staying at the same resort in Koh Tao, the Ocean View Bungalows with a beautiful view of the Sairi beach. This is where the two groups would meet, probably in the resort restaurant or bar, where the groups immediately hit it off and spend the rest of the vacation exploring Koh Tao together. And together, exploring the island, partying away their nights, is exactly how the groups were spending their day on the 14th of September. At around 7 pm, as the nightlight of the island is picking up, music is starting to blare from bar speakers, and streets are starting to get busier, both groups head out from their hotel rooms and go to a bar located on Sairi Beach, where they sit around a table, order a few rounds of drinks together, and just have fun. Photos from that night at the bar show a happy group of youngsters, like literally any of us would be in their position. Hannah, with her beautiful blonde hair, pink tube top, and chunky bracelets, looks beautiful. David, in his two-tone shirt with his hair parted to the side, looks like the handsome, well-built young man he was. After a few hours at that bar and bar hopping a little, after midnight, the two groups split, doing their own thing for a bit. CCTV footage from this time shows Hannah and her 3 friends heading to a bar called AC Beach Club, while the footage shows David walking around Koh Tao street markets with his friends. Perhaps AC Beach Club was the place to be that night, because a few hours after the group split, David and his group found themselves back with Hannah's group at AC at around 1:30 am, where they began partying the night away. Now, accounts of what goes down at AC are unclear, but very quickly after David and his group arrived there, Hannah and David left AC together and headed to Sairi Beach at around 2:30 am, leaving their groups behind. The distance from the part of the beach they were headed to their hotel room was maybe 30 feet in total, so they must have felt safe enough to be there late in the night, because had they just turned their heads around from the beach, they would have seen their own balconies. That's what the two must have thought. But that night, when Hannah and David's friends went back to their respective rooms at the resort, none of them found Hannah or David. The two weren't in their rooms or anywhere on the way. But I can imagine the group must have assumed that the two were out for a party or at a beach together and would meet everyone else the next morning safe and sound.
Or just, this is a group of students that is on an island in Thailand.
Sure.
One could easily think they're just hooking up or, having a good time.
So David had a girlfriend. We'll kind of get to that later. But so that's not a normal assumption for David's friends to make, because he did have a girlfriend. And
fair.
Everything so far is just they're all platonic friends just hanging
All
out
right,
together.
okay. But, these are still
So
young
maybe they
people.
just went to a party.
Sure.
And maybe still something happened, Nobody really knows.
Fair.
But whatever. So that's what the groups thought. They were out there doing something, having fun, and would meet the group the next morning safe and sound. The next morning, however, the groups didn't find Hannah and David safe. At around 5 am the next morning, a mute Burmese worker was cleaning the Sairi beach, as he had done countless mornings in the past. Beer cans, vodka bottles, cigarette packets, snacks were all things he had picked up from the beach to make it presentable every morning for the hordes of tourists who would spend their day there. But this morning, as this worker was making his way across the beautiful white sand, a sight he saw in the distance made his heart drop. It was dark at 4 am, but he was certain about what he was seeing. 2 bodies, one floating in the water and the other lying face up on the sand. As the worker went closer, the sheer brutality of the scene became obvious. The white sand around the bodies had turned red. There was blood everywhere. The body lying face up on the sand was obviously a girl. But that was obvious not because of her facial features or long hair. There was nothing left of her face or her hair. It had been smashed in, with her scalp having been torn apart and skull completely crushed. It was obvious this body was of a woman for different reasons. Because this body was half naked, with bite marks on her breasts and her underwear missing. The other body, the obviously male one, was a lot less violently beaten up, but it must have oozed so much blood that the entire area of water where the body lay looked bright red. This body was half naked too, with the shirt missing. Next to the bodies were found 2 cigarettes, a used condom, and a bloody garden hoe believed immediately to be the murder weapon. I made the mistake of looking for these crime scene photos online. I end up doing that sometimes for cases where the crime scene is unique. It tells a story and forms part of the mystery. Cases like Burari and Praveen Varghese. This is one of those cases. And so I looked them up and oh my god, never have I ever seen a more brutally and violently killed body than this woman's.
While researching this case, Aishwarya called me and said, Aryan, you need to look at these pictures. And I said, I'll wait until the episode.
These,
so this is the first time I'll be seeing these. We most probably cannot show the we cannot show the uncensored version on YouTube. But
I know we've had conversations, on this podcast before where Aryan's mentioned sort of being on that space of the internet when he was much younger, where there is a lot of sort of
I've seen a lot of gore
imagery, right?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is going to impact me, but
impact him the same way it does me, but we'll see what he thinks. So this is David's body. If I can describe what I'm seeing, there's like some marks of blood on his face, a little bit.
Yeah.
It's clear that some amount of rigor mortis has set in. His eyes look really blue. He looks really pale. Otherwise, it's clear he's bleeding from his head. There's like a pool of blood under his head. But obviously, this is the lot less violent picture. That is Hannah.
Yeah,
and I can just imagine, I can't look at this picture. Aryan said, please keep printouts ready for the photo because it's always easier to not have to pull our phones out. And I just told him, I can't print these pictures out. I don't want to have to look at them.
Yeah, in this image, she's been bludgeoned. Her face has literally been bludgeoned to death. That is a horrific murder.
What we just saw, the beach cleaner that day saw the same thing firsthand and ran to his boss, a man named Montrevart Tavician, and called him to the scene. Tavician was the first person to call the police to the crime scene, who went on to identify the bodies as those of Hannah and David. Now, very interestingly, Montrevart Tavician is part of what is called Koh Tao's mafia, with him being one of the most influential mafia leaders of the island. He owned part of or whole of a ton of Koh Tao's businesses, including parts of the Sairi Beach and the AC Beach Club, the very same bar that Hannah and David were at the night before. Not only was he and his entire family influential for owning a host of businesses, though, Montrevart Tavician was also the elected chief of the island. And so, for a murder to take place on such prominent mafia property was not normal at all. So when Montrevart used his influence and called the police promptly showed up. But from the moment the Thai Royal Police showed up, the crime scene turned into a fish market. To start off with, for a few reasons, it wasn't really the police's fault that the crime scene went on to get very compromised. One of those reasons is the fact that Koh Tao had a total of 6 police officers at the time of the murder who worked not out of a building that looked anything like a police office, but more like beach shacks. Needless to say, none of them were trained in how to carry out a serious double murder investigation, especially on an island where this was the first murder in almost a decade. Secondly, the crime scene went on to get compromised because of the location the bodies were found in. They were so close to the water and the tides were getting higher, meaning the police had to move the bodies to prevent them from getting washed away. The water from the entire time the bodies hadn't been seen by anyone had already probably washed away a lot of evidence, and in general, it was much harder to cordon off a very public and very open part of a beach in a very tourist town. But not to make excuses for the police. They truly had failed to protect the crime scene even in ways that they could have. People were walking all over the bodies, taking photos of the two that became easily available online like they did to us. There was no crime tape, and evidence such as cigarettes, the murder weapon, and the used condom were all dumped into an old beer box to be transported to forensic labs. And we'll come to these details later in more detail.
It's a weird thing to say, but something like a condom could be so helpful, especially
so
if it's
valuable,
used because
absolutely.
there is
so
nothing,
much DNA on
so
it.
much DNA.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
A beer
A
box.
beer box. It's some random cardboard beer box they found on the side. The police also only focused on one murder weapon, the garden hoe, completely ignoring the fact that Hannah and David's injuries looked completely different. They were nothing alike. While Hannah's looked like she's been bludgeoned to death, David had tiny stab marks everywhere. But the police did nothing. The police's incompetence didn't stop there. They did nothing to find the CCTV footage of Hannah and David from the night before. That footage, the one I've referenced before, was found by an Australian journalist who then gave it to the police. The police's response when this footage was released, they released completely different footage of a totally different couple, claiming their footage, the police's footage, was the correct one. But it obviously wasn't. The couple in the police's footage weren't wearing the clothes that Hannah and David were wearing, and the woman in the police's footage was Asian, while Hannah was as Caucasian as they come. Slowly, pressure was mounting on the Koh Tao police while the murders were garnering international media coverage, putting this tiny little island under a global microscope. Eventually, when it became obvious that the local Koh Tao police would be unable to handle this, investigative forces from Bangkok, led by Police Lieutenant Panya Maiman, were sent to Koh Tao to do the job. And the moment these forces arrived, within days, there was a suspect in the case. A suspect who began to be called the Running Man. Turns out this new police force from Bangkok arrived at the island, did some hunting, and found CCTV footage from the night of the murder. In this black and white footage, time stamped for 3:45 am, the night of the murders, there's a young Asian man wearing only a pair of shorts who seems to be walking in the direction of where Hannah and David's bungalows were, where they were probably hanging out on the beach. Then an hour later, at 4:48 am, the same CCTV footage shows the same man, now looking seemingly agitated, running back from the direction where Hannah and David's bodies were found. This is just 10 minutes before the beach cleaner found their bodies and alerted his boss, Montrevat about it. This man began to be referred to as the Running Man until the police did some investigating and actually found out who this man was. Turned out he was the nephew of Montrevat, a boy named Namsat. Now, at this point, I need to point out how coincidental some of these details are to me. Hannah and David, right before they died, were hanging out at the AC bar owned by the Tavichian family. Then they walked to the beach, again owned by the Tavichian family. On this beach, their dead bodies are found, and the first person on the crime scene to call the police is Montrevat. Now, an eerie CCTV footage shows a man running from the scene of the crime minutes before bodies are found, and this running man is the nephew of Montrevat. This is a lot of the Tavichian family that suddenly seems to be involved in this case very quickly. It's just odd to me. And it's odd to this new Bangkok police force too. This police force, led by Lieutenant Panya, is open about the fact that they will go after the Tavichian family if they think the family is involved in the crime. The police come up with a theory that Hannah or David got into a fight with someone at the AC bar, someone either from the Tavichian family or hired by the Tavichian family, and that they have footage that proves the family was somehow involved in the crime.
Aishwarya, something like a fight at the bar should be corroborated by witness testimony, right? Because the bar was packed that night.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, were there any witnesses that came forward to attest to a
We
fight?
don't have much detail about this specific investigative team. I don't want to give you too many details.
Okay.
We're about to get to it soon.
Okay.
The leader of this police force, Lieutenant Panya, even calls the Tavichian family in for questioning, which is a big deal considering how prominent the family is in Koh Tao. Upon hearing and seeing all of this go down, the people of Koh Tao, for once, breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that this new police force isn't corrupt and won't bow down to the Tavichians. In everyone's mind, Namsat Tavichian is suspect number 1. And then came the day of the reenactment. In the Thai policing system, the reenactment is both an archaic and a dystopian event right out of a George Orwell novel. The concept is that when the police finally think they have their suspect, they take their suspect to the scene of the crime in full view of the public and the media, where they make the suspect reenact the crime.
Is this still a thing?
Yes, it is.
What?
It was at least like till 2014. I don't necessarily know of this
That's
year,
insane.
but yeah, a really popular Thai tradition. And finally, for the murder of Hannah and David, the reenactment day had arrived. The public gathered and waited around the beach to catch a glimpse of Nansat Tivichian being walked by the police, to catch a glimpse of him showing the world how he killed the two youngsters. The police van finally arrived and people gasped. It was time. The van doors flung open, camera shutters drowned the sound of waves, and slowly, out of the van, exited a small, skinny man. And then right behind him, another small, skinny man. Neither of them were Namsat. The public stood in shock. Who the hell were these two men? Where was Namsat, their lead suspect, the running man? Not only was Namsad missing though, so was Lieutenant Panya, the lead investigator responsible for interrogating Namsad and the Tivichian family, the man in charge of this case. Turns out, the moment Lieutenant Panya pointed a finger at Namsad and the Tivichians and began questioning them, within days he was transferred and removed from the case. And the moment he was transferred, the new detective suddenly began to claim Namsad had nothing to do with the crime, that he had a perfect alibi, and that a Thai man would never commit such a crime. Namsad had apparently come forward to give the police a video of him attending his university in Bangkok the morning after the murder, claiming he couldn't possibly be the running man and be in Bangkok the morning the bodies were found at the same time. And this to the police was enough to let him off the hook. The police completely ignored the fact that many came forward to give accounts of Namsad leaving the island very quickly on a boat to go to college a few hours after the murder, not before it. The police also ignored the fact that the university video of Namsad circulated online and was claimed by many to be doctored. Many said the video had the wrong timestamp and seemed to cut at random moments. Regardless though, the new detectives now had one fundamental belief. A Thai man wouldn't commit such a crime. So now the police needed to find a man who would. And they landed on just the right nationality in the form of poor Burmese immigrants who lived in Koh Tao. An interesting fact about Koh Tao is that its population of Burmese migrants exceeds its population of Thai nationals. A lot of these migrants are illegal immigrants too and are a population susceptible to abuse in Thailand.
Ash, I didn't have the opportunity to visit Thailand a week ago, unlike you, but I was there a few months ago in Phuket only.
Yeah.
And me and my brother, we were looking for cigars.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of cigars, this Thai man sold us some weird looking cigarettes. Okay. And I didn't know what they were, but I was like, okay, this is something new. Let's try it. And we tried lighting it and they tasted awful. Okay.
Sure.
And so as we were trying to light it, we were flocked by 3 or 4 people that we can tell aren't Thai, but they're Asian. And they begin to tell us in their broken English that those are Burmese cigarettes. And they're different kind of cigarettes.
Right.
And because we didn't like them, you know, the cigarettes, we gave it to them. We're like, you can keep it if you like this. And they were just elated.
Sweet.
And so that's when I realized there's a big Burmese population
Thailand,
you know, doing these petty jobs in Thailand.
Right. Corroborating Aryan's versions from everything I've read and heard, it seems like the Burmese in Thailand are treated like second-class citizens, being given all the manual labor jobs. So when time comes to find a scapegoat for a crime, sometimes they can be an easy target for that too. And unfortunately, that is exactly what happened in this case after Namsad, our running man, was left off the hook. Reports and videos suggest the police literally went to localities of Burmese workers, poured boiling water on them, beat them up, and accused many of them for being responsible for Hannah and David's murder. Then, in CCTV footage from the night of the murder, the police also found 3 Burmese men sitting on a scooter and heading to a 7-Eleven, and then heading to Sairi Beach in the wee hours of the night to the same area where Hannah and David were killed. In the police's eyes, they had just hit a jackpot in this case. They identified these 3 men as Mau Mau, Zaolin, and Vapio and brought them in for questioning, then arrested all 3 of them and then managed to extract a confession from the 3 of them. And then it came time for the reenactment. Right before the reenactment, something weird happens where Mau Mau disappears and only Zaolin and Vapio are brought to the beach. Here's a quick fact in the middle. Mau Mau worked at AC Bar for Montrevat Tivichian, the same bar where Hannah and David allegedly got into a fight with a member of the bar staff. Another weird coincidental Tivichian connection in this case. Conveniently, the police never checked more than the one 7-Eleven CCTV camera for the three men's whereabouts, a fact that will come out to later be criticized in court. Now, back to the reenactment. Countless people have come forward to say the first thing that they noticed when Zhao Lin and Wei exited the police van on the beach was how tiny they were, sitting at less than 5 feet 5 inches. Their height and stature reminded a lot of people of David, who was a well-built man sitting at a height taller than 6 feet. Hell, even Hannah was taller than these men. They killed those two, wondered everyone when they saw the men at the reenactment.
As somebody who's not 6 foot, this is like body shaming, Ishwara. So I think
But
you should
it's true. It gets you off the hook for a murder of a really well-built,
No, but like men,
gigantic
dude,
man.
there are awesome Muay Thai fighters in Phuket that could
Okay,
beat
but
you
we're
up.
not talking about awesome Muay Thai.
No, but I'm just
Obviously,
saying,
there
like,
are
don't like,
exceptions.
you know, I mean, you just calm down on the 5
Like
foot
if
5
someone
thing.
says that I like did something to Aryan, it'd be a little bit.
Or-
That'd be easy to believe.
That'd
sorry.
be easy to believe, yeah.
Zhao Lin and Wei were then made to stand at the crime scene in front of everyone, wearing helmets and stab vests for their protection against a possibly angry mob, and they were publicly asked to confess. But when the two men opened their mouths, they refused to accept responsibility for the crime. "We didn't do it, we were tortured," they cried out to the public, and the public gasped in shock. This looked hugely embarrassing for the police and deeply tragic for Hannah and David. Despite that, though, the reenactment continued, and Zhao Lin and Wei were taken back into custody. Slowly, more information came forward about the basis on which Zhao Lin and Wei were arrested. The police claimed three things. Firstly, DNA from both men matched the DNA found in the crime scene and inside Hannah's body. Secondly, they found David's cell phone with the men. And thirdly, that a footprint found on the beach next to the bodies matched that of one of the men. Turns out that night, all three of the men decided to drink and smoke a little, spend some of the money they had just gotten in their paycheck that morning, and so they all headed to 7-Eleven on Zhao Lin's scooter, where they allegedly bought alcohol and cigarettes, but what they bought isn't visible on camera. Then, the three men can be seen heading towards Sairi Beach. Then, allegedly, at around 2 a.m., Mao Mao left the two men because he wanted to see his girlfriend and took the scooter with him, promising to come back shortly, but he ended up not coming back. Zhao Lin and Wei now had no way of walking back to their own home, but Mao Mao's home was closer, and so they just headed back to his home to crash there. The next morning, the two men showed up to work as usual without any bruises on their bodies and performed their duties like every day. Nothing was different, according to the men's boss. This story is the version of the three men. The police claim sometime after Mao Mao left the two and before the two headed back to Mao Mao's house, they saw Hannah and David making out, possibly maybe having sex on the beach. When this visual got these two drunk men turned on and they decided they needed to rape Hannah. This story is a little weird considering David had a loving girlfriend, like I mentioned, who even today stands by him and even posthumously accepted a degree on his behalf with his mother in 2015. But anyway, the police say that in the struggle of the rape, they brutally killed Hannah and David, stole David's phone, headed back to Mao Mao's house, and threw David's phone behind Mao Mao's house where the police would go on to find it. The fact that this phone behind Mao Mao's house was David's was actually confirmed by British intelligence, which was illegal for them to do because no British agency can legally help any country give any citizen the death penalty. In this case, British intelligence did help the Thai get closer to being able to give these men the capital punishment. But this phone behind the house strikes a lot of people as weird. Zhao Lin and Wei actually agree that they took the phone, but they say they took it because they found it on the beach. But then they got scared about stealing someone's phone since they were illegal immigrants and ended up throwing it behind the house they were spending the night at. What strikes people as weird is, would you take the phone of a murder victim, your murder victim, and throw it behind the house you're sleeping at the night of the murder? Even if you did do that, would you agree to taking the phone of your murder victim later on? Would you go on to work the next morning after you committed double murder? Would you not run, hide, leave the island and go back to your home country? Here's the thing. These aren't the only weird things about Zhao Lin and Wei arrest. For starters, the two men claim they've been tortured by the police and maintain their innocence. They also claim the police never really understood what they were saying and they never really understood what the police were saying. Zaulin and Vapio speak neither great English nor great Thai, and the inspectors spoke only Thai. The police did find a random fruit vendor to translate for the two suspects, but you know what's funny? When this translator was called to testify in court, he himself needed a translator for how poor his Thai was.
Aishwarya, this is the worst police investigation I think we've ever covered on Desi crime.
Absurd. This is absurd.
Makes no sense.
I know. This is insane. And it keeps getting worse. Secondly, the DNA evidence that ties the men to the crime scene has, and let me say this slowly, no chain of command. What happens when police gather evidence is that it travels in a chain of command from one person to another, from one lab to another, from one police station to another, with each level of this command maintaining records of who was responsible for the DNA. In this case, the police are open. They've got no clue who took the DNA, who sent it to the labs, and who accepted it at the labs, or who made sure it wasn't tampered with or contaminated. All they know is they shoved all the DNA into old beer boxes. What's weirder is that when trial began and Zaulin and Vapio's lawyer wanted the DNA to be retested against the two men, the police is like, oops, sorry, we used up all the DNA and lost the remaining bits. There was one thing that still had DNA left though, the garden hoe. And when that was retested during the trial, it did not match the DNA of the two men. It had David's DNA on it, but also had the DNA of two other unidentified Asian men.
I mean, that should... At this point, you're supposed to test that DNA against the DNA of the initial suspects.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The Tuvician family?
Yes, Tuvician. Never happened.
Oh my god, this is so infuriating.
So infuriating. DNA experts have come forward to say that DNA is so incredibly precarious. How the police found individual matches in this case was by amplifying a part of the larger DNA. This DNA was collected from a busy beach. It genuinely may have belonged to Zaulin and Vapio, but it may also have belonged to hundreds of other people who passed by that beach. Yet again, this is not where the weird details end. Turns out, when an Australian reporter was interviewing English backpackers the day of a vigil to see if any of them knew Hannah or David, he stumbled on a man named Sean. Sean knew David. The two had gone to university together. They lost contact and didn't come to Koh Tao together, but they bumped into each other in Koh Tao, where Sean had been living for a while. When this reporter asked Sean to say some nice things about David, he looked visibly distressed and, quote, twitchy, according to the reporter. The reporter noted that he kept looking over to the vigil as if he was making sure nobody was watching him talk to the reporter. Sean first told the reporter that David had asked him to come party with him the night of the murder, but that he wasn't feeling well and so he stayed in his room all night. Then later, CCTV footage actually shows that Sean was out and about that night, although the footage doesn't necessarily show him with David. Quote, "You seem really anxious. I know it's desperately sad what's happened, but is there anything wrong and something we can help with?" The reporter remembers asking him. And he said, quote, "You'll find out. You'll find out there are darker forces at play here," end quote. Then, a few days later, while this reporter slept in his hotel room at night, he got a call from Sean who was panicking. The reporter describes it best. Quote, "Sean was really stressed, really anxious, and he started sort of rambling and talking about how he was hiding in the 7-Eleven supermarket. He was in the store behind the counter with the shop assistant, and he said, 'They're trying to kill me.' And he said, 'There are the mafia outside staring at me through the window, telling me I'm going to die if I don't leave the island. I'm going to die.' And he'd been posting similar stuff on his Facebook page as well, appealing for help. And one of the guys who was banging on the window was Montrevat Tuvician," end quote. The next day, Sean took a 3 p.m. ferry out of the island and left Koh Tao forever. On this boat out, he gave his last interview.
You're gonna hang yourself tonight. You're gonna hang yourself tonight. We're gonna watch you hang. But you died tonight, so I just ran. I think they needed a scapegoat. I think they might know who it was.
That's already weird to you? Hold your horses. When Montrevat Tuvician was asked why he ran after and threatened Sean, Tuvician said that many people saw a bloodied Sean the night of the murder, and he ran behind him to confront him about the blood. And this is true. There were some reports that people had seen Sean with blood on his clothes.
ที่ก็ถามเงี้ยต่อหน้าตำรวจ2 คนเนี่ยว่าเลือดที่ติดตัวที่โลตัสบาร์เขาเช็ดออกให้เป็นเลือดของใคร เลือดยังไงมายังไงชอนเขาก็ไม่ตอบเขาก็ออกจากบาร์แล้วเขาก็วิ่งไปแล้วก็ไปที่ซุปเปอร์มาร์เก็ตพวกพี่ก็ตามไปดูเราถามแค่นี้ทำไมมันต้องวิ่งคืออีกอย่างเราก็สงสัยอยู่แล้วแล้วก็ตำรวจก็มันออกอาการแบบแล้วมันทำไมต้องวิ่งอ่ะเราก็ถามแค่นี้
Never mind all of these weird details though. Zaolin and Vapio were all the police cared about. The trial against the men began on July 8, 2015 in a Koh Samui court and lasted 18 days, 10 hours each day. The public was not allowed to take notes of the trial, nor was the trial recorded, and so there are no direct quotes available from it. But the trial was attended by major human rights organizations like Amnesty International. At trial, all the weird details about the DNA and missing CCTV footage and corrupted crime scene came forward. But in the end, none of it mattered. On the 24th of December 2015, Zaolin and Vapio were found guilty of murdering Hannah Witheridge and David Miller and were given the death penalty. Their death penalty was appealed multiple times, but the appeals were unsuccessful until August of 2020 on the birthday of Thailand's king, when the king replaced the men's death penalty with a life imprisonment verdict. The king's ruling makes sense when one considers how the Bangkok Post describes the aftermath of the trial. Quote, practically no one believes Zaolin and Vapio really brutally murdered English tourists. In Thai media of all kinds, the consensus is that they were scapegoats. This overwhelming public skepticism stems from the police's long-standing notoriety for arresting poor and powerless scapegoats to save rich criminals who can afford to buy their innocence. End quote. Hell, in 2016, even the online hacking collective called Anonymous hacked servers of the Thai police website in support of Vapio and Zaolin, asking for people to boycott Thailand for its treatment of minorities. Today, Zaolin and Vapio still sit in prison, but the streets of Koh Tao don't feel any safer. They don't feel any safer because Hannah and David's wasn't the last eerie, weird death Koh Tao was going to see. Chapter 2 Unnatural Koh Tao, the story of Christine Inslee. The island had begun healing from Hannah and David's death. The police presence had toned down, tourists had started to return, and Koh Tao felt like Koh Tao again. For a moment, just for a moment there, it felt like the death of Hannah and David may have been a freak once-in-10-year occurrence that the island could move on from. And while the island was trying to move on, in January of 2015, 4 months after their murder, a family back in the UK was desperately trying to get hold of their daughter, 23-year-old Christina Inslee, who had travelled to Koh Tao to have the time of her life. But for the last 24 hours, since January 20th, there was no sign of Christina, no text, no call, nothing uploaded to social media, which worried her parents. And so, as the family contacted the hotel she was staying at, the In Touch Resort, and as the hotel staff knocked on her door and knocked some more, nobody answered. Eventually, Christina's room door was opened using a master key, and inside was every parent's worst nightmare. The young Christina lying face down on her bed, with her clean white bedsheet having turned red from blood that had oozed from her nose and mouth. Other than that, no obvious signs of injury or struggle or trauma or sexual assault jumped out at those who saw her body first. Only that the room smelled, meaning her body had been decomposing for a while, a process made much faster by the hot and humid temperatures of Koh Tao. But point being, on the face of it, the scene very much looked like it could be an accidental death or suicide. But slowly, Christina's family would begin noticing details that would make them believe their daughter died no natural death. She was killed. But before we get into that, let's talk a little about Christina before the day she died. Christina as those who loved her knew her. 23-year-old Christina was from New Zealand originally, but she had lived in the UK with her family for as long as she could remember. When her father was asked to describe her, this is what he said. She was very popular in secondary school, very, very intelligent, top of her class, and she always championed the underdog. So whether you were gay and having trouble telling your parents or getting bullied, she would always help people. She'd go and help them with their work. And she was very, very kind-hearted and very well thought of. And the same applied when she went to university. She excelled at university. Besides being academic, she had a mischievous side to her as well. She'd organize to go out at lunchtime with a bottle of wine as she got older, and we'd say, "Where are you going to get that from?" And she'd just pull a bottle from her bag that she had, and she'd pull a couple of champagne glasses along with it, and then sit in the sun having a picnic. So yes, she was lovely. I think she would have ended up either as a politician or as a journalist, because she was very inquisitive. She'd enlisted to do a master's degree and she was accepted at the Queen's College over here. And unfortunately, we got the letter of acceptance just after she died. End quote. Her best friend describes her like this. She was different. She wasn't afraid to be different in her opinions, but quite upfront about what she believed and why she believed those things. She was very, very engaging, so people would sort of flock to her in a way. She'd always be talking to somebody. She'd sort of seem to be a magnet that drew everybody together, really. She's a very, very fun person. It was this fun and adventurous, yet inquisitive and curious side of Christina that got her to Koh Tao. The fun and adventurous because, well, Koh Tao is gorgeous and a tourist hub, but inquisitive and curious because Christina had actually picked Koh Tao because she really wanted answers to the murder of Hannah and David.
No way. I mean, this is the kind of person I'd want as my friend, right?
I know, right?
If I
She
want a
sounds
bottle of
awesome.
wine and you
And
can
they
just
just
plop
have
it out of your
their
bag,
yeah.
it's the most clutch friend to have.
I know.
But to go to an island, this is like murder tourism of sorts, right?
And sort of Aishwarya Aryan.
Yeah, I mean,
research
she's sort of-
vibe.
exactly.
Right. Ever since Christina had been on the island, she had been visiting that spot on Sairi Beach, the spot where the bodies were found, the spot where the reenactment happened, and she had been taking pictures and talking to people around, asking questions. The friends she made on the island, including a boy she had been hanging out with for quite a bit, all warned her to stay out of poking into Hannah and David's murder. It could be dangerous, they told her, but Christina had her mind set on finding answers. Right now, though, none of this was on the family's mind. All they were thinking was how they will never get their beautiful daughter back. The family didn't have much else on their mind because they trusted the Thai police, just like they would trust the police of the UK or New Zealand. Which is why, when Christina's autopsy returned a few days later and her cause of death was determined to be respiratory failure due to an accidental overdose from her mixing her chest infection medication called tramadol with alcohol, the family believed that too. Christina had had a chest infection, yes. It was a little weird that she'd taken enough meds and enough alcohol to cause an overdose, but the family was taking this to be a horrible, horrible accident where their daughter possibly got carried away by the culture of drinking at the island. That's exactly what they said about Chrissy, that she died because she had drunk too much alcohol and she had taken an overdose of prescription drugs over her own fault and not blaming anyone else at all. We didn't know anything about the bad part of Koh Tao. We didn't know anything about the corruption. They were the police force over there. We trusted them as you would in most Western countries, in America or New Zealand or here in the UK. You trust the police force. And we accepted it initially, said Christina's father. The family was taking this to be an accident. Until Christina's father asked the police for the last known CCTV footage of Christina alive. Not because they were suspicious, but because they wanted this last video of their daughter alive. And the police gave it to the family. But in the footage, the family noticed something really weird that hadn't been told to them before. They noticed Christina walking into her room at 5 a.m., but she's not alone. She's with a boy. An hour later, this boy leaves the room and Christina is never seen alive again. The family is livid. Who is this boy? Has anyone talked to him? They ask the police. And the police is just like, not really, no. No matter how much the family urged the police, they just wouldn't question this boy. But they did tell the family his name, the country he was from, and that right after he left Christina's room, he was scheduled to fly back to his country. And he did. So the family used all of this information to question this boy themselves. They found him online. This boy too agreed to get on a call with the family and was very respectful, answering all of their questions. He seemed so honest and upfront that Christina's father came out of the call with the thinking that this boy couldn't have done it. He couldn't have killed his daughter. But this boy did give the family an eerie detail that makes them think someone else killed Christina. Firstly, he was the one to tell the family that Christina had been going around asking questions about Hannah and David's death. Secondly, and more importantly, he tells them that when he left Christina, she was absolutely coherent and sober. There is no way, he says, that she could have died in the way the police are describing it.
Aishwarya, so if this is the, if this is the murderer,
Right.
and he's trying to play innocent, there is no way he's going to discard the police's theory, right?
Right, absolutely.
So, because that would help him if he was the
Correct.
murderer. So,
Yeah.
for him to call out, say,
And
hey,
say, "That's
I'm
not
not the
it."
murderer, but the theory the police is giving right now
Also
doesn't
doesn't
make any
fit.
sense, makes me much like Christina's father believe him.
Yeah, I agree. This information by this boy gets the family on edge. They wonder if Christina was killed for asking the wrong questions. They wonder if she was drugged forcefully. And just as they're asking these questions, the online hacker collective Anonymous that had hacked the Thai websites during the Hannah and David investigation came out with another statement during the hustle and bustle of Christina's investigation. This statement by Anonymous read, Christina Inslee, another British backpacker, also died on the island of Koh Tao just a few days after she arrived in perfect health. She was found dead in her room at the In Touch Resort in Koh Tao. It is ironic that the owner of the In Touch Resort just happens to be none other than Montrevat Tavician. End quote. And here we go again. It's Montrevat Tavician again. It's another case that's somehow linked to him.
The coincidence,
This is so
there's a
weird.
point where coincidences, enough coincidences stop being coincidences.
And I have two theories, right? I think there are only two possibilities. One, that Montrevat Tavician just owns
Godfather.
so much.
Godfather.
Exactly.
Godfather.
Owns so much of the island and employs so many people on the island that any murder is
Well,
just
well,
like
yeah.
80% more likely to end up being
Sure.
like in his territory. Or that he has something to do with these crimes. It's just wild.
I veer towards the latter.
The latter, yeah. To Christina's family, though, step one wasn't to bring down Montrevat Tavician. That was too big a goal, too impossible a goal. Step one to them was asking for Christina's blood samples so the family could get them independently tested. But after months and months and months of asking, the Thai authorities never sent the blood samples to the family. Eventually, the family was like, don't send us the blood, okay? Just send us the toxicology report that you've already gotten conducted. And after much asking, sure, the police sent the toxicology report to the family. Now, this report includes all of the things that the Thai police said it should. It includes alcohol and the 2 drugs that Christina was taking for her chest infection. But there are no quantities written out to any of these, which is so uncommon for toxicology reports. So the family basically has no idea how much alcohol or how many pills were in her system and whether they were enough to cause her death. The family also asks for a copy of the police report that the Thai police filed. And maybe now the family are just reading too much into it because they're already suspicious. But they say that the police report has so many unnecessary details and is so needlessly long that it just seems like the police are trying to invent a story. You know how you overshare and overtalk when you're lying? That's what it seems like to the family. Again, in this case, just as in Hannah and David's case, there are other weird details. One of them being the fact that when one dies of respiratory failure from an overdose, as the police said Christina did, the lungs fill up with fluid, making the body very, very heavy. The head takes a sort of eggplant shape due to this fluid buildup and your blood vessels backing up, with your head turning into a much darker color. And then you don't bleed from your mouth and nose, but you have white froth coming from your mouth and nose. None of this, absolutely none of this, was noted in Christina's body by the police. Now you might be thinking, sure, the police didn't notice it, but did her parents notice any of this when they got her body? By the time they got her body had been embalmed. But what Christina's parents didn't know was that her body was embalmed with formaldehyde, a chemical that hasn't been used for embalming in most developed countries for many, many years now because of how toxic it is to whatever remains in the body. Christina's parents also later learned that Koh Tao is too small to have a cold storage facility for dead bodies. And so, as a sign of respect for the dead bodies are taken to a temple instead and placed there in the heat, where the body decomposes much, much faster due to the humidity and temperatures. And you know what happens to a body when it decomposes? It actually produces alcohol, meaning any toxicology report conducted on Christina later would have been completely useless, with little to no way of being able to tell whether or not she actually died of an overdose, the way the police claimed she did. Needless to say, most of this is incredibly suspicious on part of the police. But the rest of it is a consequence of a lack of training and of necessary infrastructure that's required to sustain the crazy lifestyle of Koh Tao's young tourists. Whether Christina's death was a cause of the former kind or the latter, we still don't know to this day. All we know is that hers won't be the last mysterious death on the island that the police would try to pawn off as an accidental death. Hers was only one of the first. Chapter 3: A Dark Cloud. The story of Elise Del Magna. Hannah and David died in 2014, Christina in 2015. By 2017, Koh Tao had gained some notoriety, and many had begun to claim that a quote, dark cloud had come over the island and cast its shadows, a cloud of death. A cloud that was only about to get darker and heavier. Yet not enough to stop the young people from taking the risk of coming to Koh Tao. To many of them, it was still an island paradise. And April 27th, 2017 was a normal day on this seeming island paradise. It wasn't tourist season on the island yet, but when has that meant anything to young kids taking gap years from college or traveling before they join the workforce? Any month can be vacation month when life is in that stage. On that day, as business was going on as usual, locals in the town noticed something odd. This wasn't the first time they were noticing this specific thing. They had noticed it for days now, and the more they saw it, the more odd it became. It was a monitor lizard that had been going into the forest and coming out of the town and then going back in over and over again. Now the locals were curious about why it kept going inside and coming back out, and so a few of them decided to follow the lizard into the forest the next time it went. Later that day, they found themselves walking into the forest, trailing the steps of a huge, slimy lizard, when they suddenly stopped dead in their tracks. The lizard had been going inside to eat something, to eat a human body that was hanging from a tree in the forest.
That is the weirdest way somebody has discovered a corpse. Please don't tell me you have images of this.
I actually don't, which is
God.
good for
Thank
me.
God. Yeah.
From the top half of this person's body, the part that hadn't been eaten by the monitor lizard, it became obvious that this was the body of a young woman who it seemed like had hung herself using the nylon ropes used on boats all over Koh Tao. Her body seemed to be covered with a number of t-shirts that were later not identified to be her t-shirts, and an empty gasoline can was found standing next to her. But what was most peculiar about her body was that it was half suspended in the air and half on the ground, a little bit unlike how we typically imagine suicide, where one's feet completely come off the ground to create the pressure that kills someone. It was this half on the ground that made it possible for the monitor lizard to eat her body for so long. Soon, the Koh Tao police arrived on the scene of the crime, and within mere days, using photographs and dental records, the body was identified to be that of a 30-year-old Belgian woman named Elise Del Magna. Described as a free spirit and somebody who was genuinely happy, Elise was a traveler with a keen interest in spiritualism. It was because of that inclination to spiritualism that Elise had first traveled to Thailand many years ago for a yoga internship, but then had later decided to move to Thailand full-time after she felt like that was where she belonged. And it was in Thailand that Elise ended up joining a group called Sacred, which is an offshoot of the Sai Baba movement. Sacred was led by a self-proclaimed German guru named Raman Andres, who Elise grew very close to and even spent some time personally studying with on an island called Koh Phangan, 2 hours from Koh Tao. While Shirdi Sai Baba and Satya Sai Baba were both revered Hindu spiritual leaders, Raman Andres was running what many have called a cult. They've said Andres engaged in sexual grooming by inviting significantly more women than men to his retreat in the name of... For many of those years, while with Andres, Elise cut her family and friends out and wasn't really in contact with anyone. She even shut all her social media accounts, leaving people with no way to reach her or know of her whereabouts. Estranged from everyone in her life, Sacred and Raman Andres was all she had. In fact, people close to Elise, like the investigator her family hired, have all come forward to say they were sure Elise was in love with Raman Andres. But whether or not he loved her, they don't know. But then, in 2017, something changed. Maybe Elise realized she needed to leave this group. And so, Elise re-established contact with the people who loved her the most and even told them she would come back to Belgium soon. This entire time while she was in Thailand though, even after she re-established contact with her family and friends, it was common for Elise to suddenly go off the radar and return a few weeks later. And so, when Elise for some reason ran away from Sacred and Raman Andres in April of 2017 and arrived at Koh Tao and then disappeared, nobody really thought something was wrong. They just thought it was Elise being Elise and that she would come back home or call or text. From their investigation, reporters and the police on Koh Tao realized that not only had Elise run to Koh Tao from Copenhagen, and not only did she plan to go back home to Belgium soon, but she actually planned to leave for Belgium just 3 days after she died. She had even let all of her luggage go to the mainland, but she never made it out of Koh Tao alive. But even this travel pattern of Elise's is weird to her family. You see, Elise left Copenhagen on a boat that stopped over in Koh Tao for a few hours, and then within a few more hours reached Bangkok. For some reason, Elise got off the boat in Koh Tao and got a room there, but just let her luggage go to Bangkok without her. Despite that, we know she did want to leave Koh Tao because she had another ticket booked for 3 days after she died. From CCTV footage, we know a few more things. We know Elise arrived on Koh Tao and only books a room at a resort on Sairi Beach for 1 night. We know she has plans of leaving in 2 days. Her first night, while she's in her beach hut, her hut actually catches fire. A fire witnessed by many who were staying in rooms surrounding hers.
Please don't tell me this hut is somehow related to the Vichian.
I mean, it's on Sairi Beach, which he owned.
So he owns
So
the
it's kind of
hut
weird.
also?
It may or may not, but he
Okay,
owned
but
a lot
again-
of the businesses on the beach and parts of the beach.
God, who are we
So,
dealing with?
I have not
Can we
the
go back to
slightest
Thailand
clue.
after covering this episode?
To do what?
I don't know, just to be alive and have fun? I don't want to be related to this Tavichian fella.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I get it. This fire in Elise's hut was witnessed by a lot of people who saw her run out of her hut when it caught fire and then never saw her again at the hotel. This is such a weird detail to me because I'm wondering, if my hut catches fire, where am I running off to? A part of me would stay back at the hotel, tell people that there were things inside I need, that they owe me some money for this inconvenience. How did the fire happen? Something. Nobody just runs away from a fire in the middle of the fire and then never returns. You know what I'm saying? After this though, Elise goes to a different hotel where she uses a fake last name for some reason. She called herself Elise Dua during check-in. But yet again, like the cases we've discussed above, none of these details were weird to the police. The fact that she seemed to be running away from something, the fact that so much travel was unnecessary for someone whose end goal was to take their own life, the fact that she wouldn't book tickets for herself if the end goal was to take her own life. It wasn't even weird to the police that Elise's hotel was on Sairi Beach, the same beach where Hannah and David died, the owner of whom also owned the hotel where Christina died. The fact that from all of these details, it seems like Elise was running away from someone who might have been following her. None of this was weird to the police. To the police, this was a clear case of suicide. And the Thai police also seemed to have a motive. Elise was depressed after having left Sacred, the spiritual group she had spent so many years with, and that separation made her suicidal. But to Elise's family, these theories made no sense.
To me, this Koh Tao police department sounds like a Netflix writer's
What is
room
wrong with them?
where they get fed like some information and they just write
And they're
endings.
like, yep, cool,
Just
awesome,
make up
yeah.
endings bereft of any facts or any
I
other
know.
theories. And they stick by it. They pursue it to its end. It makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
The worst investigative...
And
Again, I
they
don't want to
leave
say...
the family like so depressed with so many, like so much of a void without any answers at all for decades on end. It's insane.
Yeah.
Even Elise's ex-boyfriend, when asked if he thought Elise could kill herself, said absolutely not. I don't believe that. She wasn't suicidal at all, and she never had these temptations. Or I never could see anything depressive so that she would be capable of doing that. But when I heard the news that she probably killed herself, that was nonsense. End quote. To come up with a theory that makes sense to them, Elise's family, like Christina's family, tried everything. They asked the police to send over records of the fire so they can determine what caused it, but nothing ever came. They asked for police reports or forensic reports or toxicology reports, but yet again, nothing ever came, even after months and months of waiting. It's now been 7 years since Elise was found hanging inside the forest, and the family, as well as online investigators and sleuths, have a few prominent theories. To start off with, nobody really believes she killed herself. The unidentified t-shirts on her body, the half hanging down the tree, the burnt bungalow, the separation from her luggage, the running from Raman Andres, the fake name, it's all very, very weird. The first theory is that someone from Sacred, her spiritual group, followed her and killed her because she knew intimate secrets about the group or Raman Andres. It would explain why she ran away from the group, who she was hiding from, and why Raman Andres ran away from Thailand immediately after Elise was found dead. But is it common for spiritual groups to go after members who leave and kill them in such creepy ways?
Yes, I'm sure it is.
Is it really?
Yeah, Shwara. If not spiritual groups, but cults. That's
Like, even to the extent I'm thinking Osho, right? No murder actually transpired for such a prominent and wealthy group. It's not, I don't think it's common for spiritual gurus.
I have heard of many cults where this happens. In fact, I would recommend reading Chuck Palahniuk's book Survivor,
Okay.
which is all about this guy who survived,
Interesting.
who's the only survivor from a cult,
Oh, shit.
and now is on the run to save his own life
Wow.
because another member from that cult is trying to kill everybody
Oh my
belonging
gosh,
to it.
that sounds insane.
And it documents many other cults where this has been the case.
All right. There's another point that's made on iHeart's podcast about Elise's death, where they say that someone from Sacred who came to Koh Tao to kill Elise would have no knowledge of Koh Tao, and so would naturally find it hard to commit cold-blooded murder in an unknown environment. And that fact is, I think, valid. The second theory is obviously that someone from Koh Tao killed her. But why? Why would someone from this unknown random island kill a girl who just stopped there for a few nights? Maybe that is precisely the evil of Koh Tao. Chapter 4: Death Island. The story of the countless lost. Even before Hannah and David died and after Elise died, people continued to die in Koh Tao. Starting with the mysterious death of Ian Jacobs in the year 2000 after he was found dead in a well, to most recently the death of a diver in April of 2024 on Sairi Beach, Koh Tao has become Thailand's center for unusual deaths, leaving families waiting for answers for decades now, with a consistent death per year. Some say these deaths aren't strange. Koh Tao is a hedonic paradise where people drink and do drugs for weeks on end. Accidents are bound to be common. Others say it's not so much people dying that's weird, but how they die that's eerie and makes Koh Tao unique.
Also, Shwara, there are many party islands
Many
around the world. I mean,
hedonic islands.
you don't
Yeah,
think
yeah.
you don't hear mysterious murders in Ibiza happening
All
every
the
now
time.
and then.
But those are
So-
also much more developed. Maybe that's the thought in my mind, but I don't know. This place doesn't even have a hospital, like a proper hospital.
till now.
Till now.
despite everything that has gone
Again,
down.
till a few years ago, back when I was reading the research. But yeah, after so many deaths, there's like no hospital.
Tell us this
Yeah,
the
super
Vichan
weird.
fam.
I think I agree with Aryan too. I agree with the latter theory. I have never heard of so many deaths, so weird and so unexplainable in methodology as these. And sure, on the island are actual people committing these unexplained heinous crimes, but it seems like the whole island is cursed, with something sinister in its air and water and lush green jungles. That is exactly what earns Koh Tao the infamous name, Death Island. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.